We have Stacy here, who is one half of the Making Sense of Autism team. And we had her partner here prior, and she could talk a little bit about that. But the podcast today that we are going to be doing is called Changing the Lens, Assessing Autism Through a Neurostrengths Based Perspective. Stacy, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump ahead to our learning outcomes for today. So, by the end of this pod course, we hope that you'll be able to define neurostrengths based assessment and explain two ways that it differs from traditional deficit based approaches used with autistic individuals. Identify two key differences between a neurostrengths based assessment and conventional autism assessment practices. Describe how a neurostrengths based assessment can change goal development and increase motivation for autistic children and teens. And finally, describe two practical mindset shifts or observations professionals can begin using immediately to move towards strengths based practice. And for our agenda today, we're starting with introductions and backgrounds. Then we're going to get into defining a neurostrengths based assessment, what that looks like. Then we'll talk about key differences in the assessment process, practical observations clinicians can begin using today, and from assessment to goal writing. And then we'll wrap up with references and closing remarks. Stacy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am a speech language pathologist, and I'm now the CEO of Making Sense of Autism, which was actually created back in early 2000s with our founder, Susan Golubach, who's an autistic, now retired occupational therapist. I really embrace neuro-affirming and neurostrength-based assessments and support for autistic individuals because I see the impact it has in how I connect and understand my clients I work with. As I mentioned, I collaborate very closely and call myself a student of Susan because I have learned so much from our founder. We train therapists, educators, so we contract with school districts to provide professional developments. And then we also train parents on how to really understand autistic individuals and move away from compliance approaches and deficit-based practices. And then I work on interpreting assessments and help understand how to interpret standardized assessments, even in a neuro-affirming way. And I also help therapists and other professionals develop goals, different supports that autistic individuals want, and they show us they want through these assessments. And this really has improved the outcomes that we see with autistic students and clients.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that information. If you are here for Stacy, my name is Vanita Lipek. I go by she, her. I have been an SLP since 2014. I'm the host of this podcast, which is part of the Tassel Learning Network. I'm also the continuing education consultant for Tassel. I also own a small private practice in Florida, South Florida to be exact. And I am currently a doctoral student at Northwestern University. I have ownership interest in Speechie Side Up LLC and Tassel Learning LLC. How about you, Stacy?
I have ownership interest in making sense of autism and the trainings that we provide.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's dive right in. We tend to hear this term neurostrength based assessment or other terms that kind of are related to that. How do you define it? And where do you see it meaningfully differing from traditional autism assessment models?
So I first want to differentiate strengths-based versus neurostrength-based. We really teach how the brain works. It's not just strengths such as they're good at art or they like trains. We're really looking at how do they learn? Do they do best with predictability? Do they learn through picking up on patterns? And this really helps us see the individual instead of just the behaviors, because sometimes those behaviors are strengths. They are telling us something. And so we have different pillars that we look at through the neurostrength based framework, and it is first strengths. What does the individual seek to do? Like, I have a client who is very, very sensory seeking. He is crashing into me, into the couch, onto the floor, exploring everything with his hands, with his mouth. That is a strength. Whereas you can see a lot of people would see that as a behavior because they're like, why are you crashing into me? Why are you putting things in your mouth? But now I view it through a different lens. He is seeking how to understand his body and everything around him, which I know as speech pathologists, we might think, oh, I'm not an OT, but I will tell you, especially with this client, if I don't talk about what he's doing with his body, if I don't recognize those behaviors as needing his vest on or needing joint compressions, I am not going to get any language that whole session. Then we look at potential strengths or emerging strengths. He is trying to tell me, hey, I need something with my body, but he can't express, I need my vest, or I need joint compressions, or I need to do some heavy work. But now I give him that language. And it's so cool because I will let him know what I'm seeing. Oh, it looks like your body might need something right now. And we go to the sensory page on the touch chat and I'll ask him, do you want to vest? And immediately, because he's an oral communicator as well as other modes of communication, and he'll immediately say vest. And so I'm like, okay, I know I got it right. And then we look at barriers. So we often call these soft skills, and we have a whole visual hierarchy of this. And at the foundation is self awareness and self advocacy. And I have to say, with so many of my clients, no matter what level of support they are, those barriers, if self awareness hasn't been developed, you're not going to get to body awareness, emotional regulation. And in the middle of that hierarchy is actually social communication and functional communication, which is where we work as speech therapists. But if we aren't addressing those barriers at the bottom, we are not. We might get performed social communication or functional communication, but we don't see it generalized. And then we look at triggers. What triggers the individual? And this is so important because research shows that we cannot desensitize. Autistic brains do not get desensitized when we expose them to their triggers, which I know when I started in the early 2000s, that's what I was taught. Yeah, oh, just put out more shaving cream, they'll get used to it. Or, make the noises, they'll get used to it. But no, that causes trauma. So it's important to identify those triggers so we can accommodate and provide the supports and teach them how to advocate for those supports. Oh, I see you covering your ears. Is it too loud for you in here? Let's get some headphones. And what we find is when we support and understand those triggers and those barriers, we start to see those start to disappear. And we almost see more potential strengths, more self advocacy or attempts for it. And then the last pillar is unready. I can't tell you how important this one is because how many times we get parents that are like, oh, I want social communication. And again, I don't care what level they are. If they don't have some of those foundational skills, they aren't ready for social communication. I have a kiddo right now who is 5 and brilliant, so smart, super strong language. But one, he has no desire for that social communication yet, and he is not ready yet. He does not have emotional awareness, emotional regulation. He doesn't have body awareness. And I see that because literally, if anyone comes up to him and asks him something, especially a peer who's unpredictable, he escalates. And so I see he's not ready for that, but you would think he would be because he's so smart. So we're actually working all the way down with understanding his body, understanding his triggers, what he can do in those moments. And this is all still in our scope of practice. It is all communication. And then, really, when we look through those pillars, it completely changes the outcome of the assessment because we're looking at different things. And so yes, I still think in the categories of receptive and expressive and social communication, but I look at it through a completely different lens of nervous system, of strengths, of barriers. And so I have a different way of explaining to parents how I'm going to support their kids. And it also helps them understand their child holistically, not just in that silo of speech and language.
Yeah, those pillars sound really important to look at in an assessment. So, is this like an informal type of assessment that you're using? Is it a standardized assessment, a combination of assessments? What does that look like?
So it is our own assessment that we've developed based on our framework, which is we researched our framework and it showed that the non-autistic therapists were able to understand autistic individuals more clearly and create strength-based goals. And then the whole framework is based on research that is out there. The assessments are, they would fall in that criterion reference category because they're not standardized. However, with our soft skills assessment that looks at the barriers, we do get a number. And what we want to see in each of those categories of strengths, potential strengths, barriers, triggers, unready, is we want to see those numbers start to move up towards the strengths. And so while it's not standardized against other individuals, which really our assessment never could be, because the whole goal of the assessment is to look at the individual and look at their movement along development, their movement along the skills they want to develop.
That makes sense. Yeah. So, is there like a normal range? Is there like a range where they need more therapy? Like, does the assessment show when a client's made enough progress that they don't need to continue in therapy anymore? I hope that
That,
makes sense.
yes, that is such a great question. It really does, because when an individual no longer has those barriers because either they've been identified, they're able to advocate for them, they get to that point where really all the skills that they wanted to develop fall into that strength category. Maybe they're still in the emerging strengths, but we also do look at development, right? Like if it isn't a skill that is developmentally within that zone of proximal development, then it's an unready skill. They shouldn't be there yet. And so you can still look at what is appropriate within their zone of development, as well as what improves their quality of life. So this too, you're going to look at, really, this assessment is for all ages and all levels of support. And you're going to look at, especially with the older individuals or the, young adults, the teens, their quality of life. Maybe it is a skill that they don't have to develop because they receive support in that area. But when they're younger, we're just looking at what skills do they still need to develop with communication.
That makes sense. Do you have a list that people are checking off in the assessment, or is it more like open ended just based on the individual?
With our strengths, stressors, and supports profile, it's all questions. And it's questions that get the parent or even the other teachers thinking about this individual. It's even questions, it is questions like I talked about, like what do they seek to do? And we give some examples, because I oftentimes find that people don't think of the they don't think of the negative things as a strength. So if they drop down every time you go to a new store or something, well, that's a strength, right? Because they're communicating in that moment. It is a behavior, but that's a strength. It's the only way they've learned how to communicate. I don't want to go in. And so we have questions to kind of guide the therapist, to guide the family or teachers, the other caregivers in the child's life, to answer these questions. And we also look at how their brain works, what skills have they picked up, and how did they pick that up? And most often the answers I get with that question are repetition and showing. Almost every parent says, well, I've shown them a bunch of times and we just do it over and over again. And that's really how they learn. And what is so awesome with that one question is because then it's like an aha moment for the parent. Like they do it subconsciously, but they don't necessarily apply it to all the skills. And so when we point that out and they start applying it to everything, they start to see a lot of progress. And I think that's the biggest thing with this assessment too, is it puts into words what we just do automatically. So if anything else, this gives a nice sample or a nice description to the family of, yes, this is your child, because that's usually what I hear. And then with the soft skills assessment, it is questionnaires and it's a key. And we don't say, is this a strength? Because we found with the stimming question, we found with parents, they would say it's not a strength because they think it's a behavior. So we had to change the key to, do they do this frequently? Or, are they triggered? Or do they try to do this, but they need help? So we had to change the questions so that there were no biases with the family. And then when the therapist goes back and they see, we even had to put shapes to it because we know that there's biases with colors. So we're like, how can we reduce all these biases? So it has shapes to it. So on the key, they'll see, oh yeah, the family said this was a heart. They do this frequently. It's a strength, whether the family saw it or not. And so it's nice when we can come back and be like, yes, this is a strength. So again, all of this just provides a very clear framework on describing the individual, describing what they need. And it's in a way that feels so good because it's not deficit. It's not, no, your child doesn't do this. And it really provides information for the team as well as insurance, because we are still talking about what are the barriers, what's getting in the way, what can this individual not do that they really want to try to do, and so they still need our support.
It sounds like you put a lot of thought into eliminating those biases. So I imagine that could be very helpful in getting a more accurate picture of the child. Another question I had is like prior to this assessment, what was your gold standard? Was there another standardized assessment that you were using before?
So, me personally, I often give the castle because
Okay.
it doesn't have the cognitive load and the working memory requirement that the self does. So, the other reason I like the castle is it they have different sort of types of assessments, and so you can really figure out how the kid's brain works too. I had a student who was in high school that I gave the castle to, and he got 50s, 60s, 70s on all the subtests that I gave him, except for the synonyms. And if you're familiar with the test, synonyms gives you 4 choices. He got well over 115. So I was like, oh my gosh, this kid, if he has choices, he's able to retrieve the language he needs. But if it's open ended, he really struggles. So it taught me so much about how his brain works. I have given the functional communication and the communication matrix in the past. I still like the communication matrix, but at the same time, I feel like that one's a little more strength based, right? Because it does show you where the child is at and the emerging skills, what they're trying to learn. And I feel like you could really use the language from our assessment toolkit with even the communication matrix, because that is a little more strength based. The functional communication profile, again, you would have to have that strength based lens to really see, okay, what are they doing instead of what are they not doing?
Yeah, it just shows you that most assessments that are out there are not focus on strengths based. But I would, like you've mentioned, the communication matrix does kind of give you like a profile. So you can see what their strengths are, what their needs are, and what their barriers are. Another question I had is this assessment completed like primarily by a caregiver or is it through observation as well or direct like assessment with the client?
So that's the beauty of it. We provide a PDF format as well as a Google Form format. So I usually, especially when I'm doing coaching with families, I go through it together because then I can kind of ask some additional questions in that moment. But if I have a new client and we don't have a lot of time during the first session, or I just want to build rapport with the kiddo the first session, I'll just send it to the parent and have them fill it out. And then I go back to it and I fill in any additional questions that I might have that next session. So then I also, if the kiddo goes to school or a daycare, I can also send it to the other people in his life and gather information from them. And that's with our strengths, stressors, and supports profile. With our soft skills assessment, I often do that a little bit after I've gotten to know the kiddo, or I use it with my kids that I've been seeing for a long time. And I'm like, something is getting in the way. Why are we not achieving these goals? And so I'll send the soft skills assessment to see what the barriers are. And that what I love too for, I actually just sent it to a client that I work with who has a lot of sensory needs and a lot of PT needs, but she's another one where very intelligent, great expressive language skills, not such she's her processing is a barrier. But I wanted to learn more about her sensory system and even her body awareness. So I sent it to her OT and her PT to gather some more information. So that's the beauty of Google Forms. You can send it to anyone, they can fill it out, and then you can follow up if you have any additional questions.
Yeah, that's so convenient.
Mhm.
Can you share a clinical example of how using a neurostrengths based lens actually shifted the goals of your client or their long term outcomes?
Absolutely. I've got quite a few case samples because we started this in 2019 as a framework when Sue came to me with it, and we trialed it with the therapist I was directing at the time. And so one client that we implemented this framework with, when the therapist went in, he often would demonstrate behaviors such as pinching or throwing things. And she would always go in with an agenda. Hey, we're going to do this. Well, after she learned about the framework, she immediately called me when she was done with her session. And she's like, we had the best session I've ever had. Because she went in with his interests of what he wanted to talk about and shared control of the full session of you take a turn and I take a turn. And it was things he enjoyed. But I have another client specifically I wanted to talk about that we started with him when he was 3. So this was actually before we even started working with this framework. And he demonstrated what we thought at the time, right, was behaviors. He would sit on the phone all the time. And so we had to kind of join in on the phone. He would become very dysregulated with any kind of sudden change, things like that. So it was kind of neat because we were learning the framework as we were better understanding this client. And now in hindsight, we see that we were trying to develop his speech or develop his language in a way that didn't make sense with him. He's a Gestalt language processor, which we didn't really know because he had such limited language and his speech production was pretty unintelligible. But as we saw the strengths, we realized, oh, he is watching these videos and picking up some phrases. And we realized some of those phrases were what he was trying to say. And so we were able to produce them slower so he could say them. And we even created a little dictionary of the phrases that he would say and what they meant. And we're expanding on those gestalts because they're definitely different. It is a true gestalt, and it didn't necessarily mean what he was trying to say. And he just gets the biggest grin on his face, like, oh my goodness, you get what I'm trying to say, which is super cool. And then in terms of the triggers that we used to see as, you know, we used to see it as rigidity. He wasn't flexible. Now we're seeing that as a strength. He loves predictability. And so we had the family put up a calendar because he wants to know what the schedule is. And he would also want things on the schedule. So we taught him the gestalt, put it on the calendar. And his parents were so excited because they realized that was the missing piece. As soon as they put it on the calendar, he would stop saying it because what we heard from the family was he's saying the same phrases over and over again, Chuck E. Cheese, Chuck E. Cheese, Chuck E. Cheese. And we'd be like, why is he asking that? Or why is he saying it? They're like, oh, because we're going there next week. And so we realized, oh, if you put it on the calendar, he sees it and he realizes, oh, yeah, it's there. It's predictable. he stopped saying it over and over again. So again, as what we saw as, this behavior, this trigger, this, perseverative thing that how people describe it, it really was a strength. It was him communicating, hey, I just want to see it on a calendar so I know it's going to happen. And then we taught him self-advocacy to ask for it. And really what we've seen, he's now 8. No, he's 9. He works with my speech assistant, and I observed him the other day, and he is so excited when she comes because he's like, here's the lady who gets me. He asks for her. He knows that she comes on Wednesdays. And not only do we see his confidence in what he's communicating and how he's communicating, he has clearer speech. And he has these expanded gestalts that other people now understand what he's trying to say. And he sees that we care to understand those phrases because he comes up with new ones all the time with his videos. And so he sees that we care to learn what he's trying to say. And when we get it, he lights up and he's like, okay, now I can say it in a way that you understand. And we now know back in the day when he just sat on his phone, he was regulating, he was learning. And so I'm so glad we joined in with that instead of taking it away. And so it's been such an awesome journey watching him feel confident in his communication and really feel understood.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing both of those examples. I feel like it really helps people to kind of visualize like the change of, going from one type of therapy model to a different type of therapy model. But like you, I've seen the same impacts when I went from like traditional, you know, ABA focused therapy versus using a strengths based approach. In terms of documentation and goal writing, how does this approach change what ends up on the IEP or treatment plan, and why does that tend to increase motivation?
The reports, I feel like, feel so much better writing. I don't procrastinate with them anymore because I feel good about what I'm sharing with the family. And I would say the number one shift is really the language. We're not saying we're not saying they don't have behaviors. We're not saying they don't have difficulties. We're not saying they don't need support, but we're saying it in a way that looks at, okay, what are they telling us that they want to learn? What skill are they already trying to do, but they aren't doing it in a way that is getting that need met? And so we're really shifting that language from what's wrong and why aren't you doing this to what's happening? What are you trying to tell us? So, we might, instead of saying that an individual is non-compliant or refusing a task, we might talk about how they're experiencing dysregulation. And so, or maybe the task exceeds their abilities. And so we're exploring different calming activities so they can advocate for that. Or we're exploring the advocacy of, can you show me or can you help me? And then providing that accommodation. And this has happened because I understand so much more about how the autistic brain works now. And so those days where an individual doesn't do the thing I taught them the last session or even the day before, I realize now that that is because of the overconnections and it might be difficult for them to retrieve, which ironically, as a self-diagnosed ADHDer, I've identified that in myself as well. It is hard for me to retrieve things in certain moments. And so I can relate to them. But then also that regulation piece of if they're dysregulated, they're not going to be able to access that. And there's nothing wrong with providing accommodations and supports in that moment to make it easier, which I actually teach my clients and students about too hard, too easy, just right, which again is a strategy from our framework. Things don't always have to be hard. And then the goals are really built around how the individual learns and what matters to them. And if we really step back and observe our clients, it really is communication. I know sometimes that phrase behavior is communication is controversial, but I try I look at that and yes, sometimes a behavior is not controlled by the individual or, because of dyspraxia or they are controlling their body in that moment. But regardless, that is still communication. That is communication that something is off, something is wrong. And if we ignore that, which I know that is a strategy of planned ignoring, but if we ignore that, we're not meeting that need, which really they're needing someone to co-regulate with them at the moment. They're needing someone to see them, see they're dysregulated, help them come down and regulate, and then go back to whatever it is they're trying to learn. And so when we understand that, and then again, going back to understanding how the individual learns, do they learn through pattern? Do they learn through repetition, which so many of our kids do? Why aren't we doing that every day? If they learn through predictability, why aren't we creating predictability in their sessions? And again, this isn't saying that we don't have a say in sessions. This isn't saying that there can't be changes in the routine. We teach soft skills. We teach problem solving. We teach shared control. So there is that reciprocal relationship, which again, if we're teaching, there is this back and forth in this session. And maybe that's even a goal we're working on because the child really wants to have a back and forth relationship. If we teach that shared control in our sessions, you get to pick something, then I get to pick something. And if you don't want to do what I don't want to do, you can watch. Or if you get upset, let's problem solve this dysregulation. Let's problem solve. Why don't you want to do this activity and make a plan? When we create our sessions around that lens and that mindset, not only are we teaching these amazing soft skills of problem solving, of working with other people, we then could go back to, well, yeah, we're working on communication. We can go back to, remember, you wanted to learn how to ask a friend to play, or if they're non speaking, I can see you're trying to communicate with me. We can communicate your need in this way. You can set up boundaries, such as when you hit me, that doesn't tell me what you want. But if you gesture or if you use your device or you use a communication board, that tells me what you want. Then you're going to get more buy-in from the individual because that's what they're trying to tell us anyways. Through their behaviors, through their nonverbal communication, they're trying to tell us this is what I want. And so you're already tapping into that intrinsic motivation.
That makes sense. I like what you said here, how you're shifting the language from what's wrong to what's happening. And I think what's wrong is more biased. Like it's looking at how the therapist or the caregiver is interpreting the issues that the client might be exhibiting to them. But the what's happening is more descriptive. There, it's like kind of taking that bias out of it. It's just like what you're observing. So thank you for sharing that. And it makes a lot of sense. I don't think I got the name of the assessment. Did you share it?
Yes. So our first one is the strengths, stressors, and supports profile. And the second
Okay.
one is the soft skills assessment.
Okay, you did mention those. I wrote the strengths, stressors, and supports, and I remember you talking about the soft skills. Okay. And then in terms of both of those assessments, like what areas are they looking at? Because I know you collaborated with an OT and you're a speech language pathologist. So what areas does it cover?
So it's holistic. It looks at everything because we still have to understand triggers and sensory and those topics of the individual because they could impact our sessions. But then what we take away, so really this assessment is for anyone. It's for teachers, it's for OTs, SLPs, psychologists, because it really gives a holistic image of who this individual is. But as speech pathologists, what we take away, because there are questions about communication, is what we take away, what are they wanting to learn? So if a kiddo, if we discover, oh, they're really curious, and say we work with them at a school setting, we can use that strength of curiosity to teach them, even sentence structure. Oh, they're curious about space. Okay, let's make a story about space. And remember, what are all of the words that have to go in our sentence to create a sentence about space? So, really, this gives you a guide of how they learn, what they want to learn, and how you can apply it to kind of what you have to teach them, right? If you're working in a school, you've got core curriculum. I know school is usually where it's a little more, you have to follow the standards and you have to work on certain things. And so there's not as much leeway. But again, this framework gives you the structure on how do I take what I know about this kiddo and apply it to make the sessions more engaging, more fun with what I have to teach them.
Okay, got it. So this could really be used as like a supplement. It's almost like a learning profile for
Yeah,
the client. Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think this could be very informative. And there's nothing like out there already for the autistic population that kind of looks at their learning profile. I'm not in the education space, but maybe you know more than I do.
There isn't right now. I mean, if
Okay.
you there are.
Like ABA assessments, I guess, do that, but in a different way. It's not strength space.
It's not at all. Like, I have a client who the family just sent me the VB map, and I was looking through it, and I'm like, it's all deficit. They aren't,
Mhm.
they do this, they don't do this. They do this, they don't do this. But it still doesn't tell me what the individual, how they learn, what they want to learn. It really doesn't look at them holistically. There are like the MIGDAS is an assessment I think psychologists use that kind of
Mhm.
looks at the sensory system of autistic individuals. I know there's the Dazzle out there, which is by the speech dude. And that one's really more that social communication, pragmatic look. And I know you can use some of the questions for different levels, but it appears like it's mostly for level one. I could be completely wrong, but this one really kind of goes deeper into not just pragmatics, but the whole individual. And again, really understanding where how their brain works, where they're coming from, so we can then apply it and use their motivate what's motivating them with what we're teaching them. And again, moving that kind of just moving them through those stages of development.
Gotcha. Sorry, I have so many like questions about this, but I think
I
it's
love
good
it.
for people to like get a good picture of, what it entails.
I
So
love
you
that because you're right. This is not like any other assessment. And so the
Mhm,
questions that you're asking are probably what other people are asking because we're given the castle, the self, the, expressive one word.
mhm,
We're so much in just that language silo. But then the troubles I hear from therapists are, how do I get my client to engage? My student doesn't want to come to therapy. This is what solves that problem. If you
mhm.
understand the individual, not just their speech and language profile, if you understand the individual, they're going to want to see you for speech. You're going to achieve the goals. And so, kind of, it is such a mindset shift and it doesn't happen overnight. And that's why we include these assessments in a course to really educate on how to look for the answers to the questions that we ask.
That's great. That's super helpful. So, like the communication matrix, it has, descriptions of where the client falls in terms of communication based on the answers that were provided. Do you have that as well for this assessment? I know you said you can get a numerical value, but does it like show you this is where the client stands compared to? I know you're like, that's not strength based, but I'm just saying, like, we don't want to have a client in therapy longer than they need to be. I feel like we can always look at things that the client could be doing better or maybe like want to improve. But at what point do we say like they don't need therapy anymore? They just like they have these self advocacy skills. They're able to use multi modes of communication. Like, how do we draw that line?
You basically just answered that question. We
Okay.
want to look at those skills of what is going to help them advocate for themselves in life, communicate clearly with other people to get their needs met, those basic skills that to be a functioning citizen in society regarding communication. So, because the autistic brain makes different connections at different times, and the skills are not linear, they're not like a typical developing child. Like the example I gave earlier about the kiddo who is unready for social communication, even though he's 5, he should be, right? I see his peers playing on the playground and creating these elaborate stories. He never joins them because he's like, that is too fast moving. Well, I know I'm interpreting it as too fast moving. He's not ready for that sort of social interaction because he's still just understanding where he is in space. And so I find that for me, the kids are ready when, yeah, there aren't any other skills that are developmentally appropriate that they haven't developed yet. So obviously, as a 5-year-old, there's plenty of skills that he shouldn't have developed yet, but being able to just communicate with his peers is something that he should, and he hasn't. And so there isn't necessarily that ceiling score, or there isn't necessarily like, okay, you've met all the check boxes of development. But we do know those as speech therapists. We do look at, you know, the developmental milestones and what kids should be doing at certain ages. But in thinking about even how our kids develop language, especially if kiddos are not necessarily analytic language learners, but learn language in chunks, that grammar may not come for a really long time. And then you want to look at, like, I have adults that I work with who are still just stalled language processors, and they don't speak grammatically correct, but they're 21 and they have a job and they have friends. So then I'm like, you know what? It's not important to them. It's not, I'm not going to make them work on it. And so I feel like it's really that educated decision for the individual, for the family, and the therapist.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And I don't think we mentioned this, but is your practice private pay, insurance based? How does this assessment fare with like insurance based practice or even like IEPs?
I am not associated with any insurance, so I'm not contracted with any insurance. The so it is all private pay. I'm out here in Colorado, and so out here, if families have Medicaid, they actually can get this covered through a fund that they get in Medicaid. You can actually also get this covered as a speech therapy evaluation assessment. So in Arizona, some families qualify for what's called the Empowerment Scholarship, and it's funding that they get for school services. And so it's covered through, different private pay modalities that way. Otherwise, if families private pay, that's another way to get the assessment completed.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering like how the goals work with private insurance or even like, yeah, private insurance, Medicaid, because I know they tend to want to see deficits that to make sure that the client needs therapy or they want to see that they, are below a certain standard deviation. So I was just wondering how this worked.
Yeah.
But I imagine with private pay that like it's more informative and you can really tailor it to the individual versus like teaching to the test.
So I'm glad you brought that up because we talk about that in our course, and we talk about that a lot. So with this new lens, you can still use a standardized test, but talking about, their strengths they did well in this, the barriers were if there were no pictures, if it was purely their auditory processing were needed during the testing. And so you're still looking at their quote unquote deficits. You're still looking at their challenges. We're using different language. We're calling, instead of a deficit, there's barriers getting in the way. The barrier might be their auditory processing. Their barrier might be their attention because they're moving around. They can't, pay attention to what anyone's saying because they're just trying to get input to their body. Their barrier might be um, that their receptive language, they aren't familiar with the vocabulary. And so you want to look at what the barriers are and describe them as barriers versus deficits, and the describing what supports they need in order to achieve goals. And those supports might look like repetition, visual supports, simplified language. And so we're still presenting the same information, but just in different vocabulary. And so you can still have scores from a standardized test, but we're not saying they're deficient in this. It was not an area of weakness due to the complicated vocabulary or the auditory processing requirement or not having choices. And the barrier is them finding the language that they is required in an open-ended sentence. And so it's really just using a different lens.
Thank you for breaking that down. And, someone listening to this might say, oh, it's just a matter of semantics, right? But I don't think it is, because we made that distinction between like the what's wrong and the what's happening. And to me, deficits is more of like an internal issue, whereas like a barrier puts it externally. It's like how the environment can provide better supports.
Absolutely. And think about what that does to the individual and then the people that are reading the report. And you're right, it's internal. And then internally have these biases, especially if it's filled with behavior language like refuses to, perseverates on. Well, then you're viewing that as a deficit. You're viewing that as something wrong with the individual. And I need to fix this perseveration. But really, it's a strength, that predictability, that pattern. And so it's just a completely different mindset shift that I totally understand. Some people are like, yeah, this feels good. I want to do it. And other people are like, no, it's change. It doesn't make sense to me. And honestly, I feel like personally, this has opened my eyes to even my wounds personally of what felt wrong with this and why do I want to move towards this. And I know for me, as someone, again, self-diagnosed with later ADHD, I felt so misunderstood as a child because I had a hard time finding words. I had a hard time with working memory and remembering things. So I would get in trouble. And now I know, like, oh, this is how my brain works. If somebody just accommodated me for these things instead of yelling at me, I would have felt better about myself as a child. And I think, not to get too deep and personal, but for someone that's listening to this and is, you know, wanting, I have to stick with this deficit. Maybe look inside yourself too and ask, why do I want to stick with this deficit language? Because we all want to be seen for who we are. We all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. And that's what we're saying with this language shift. These are human beings. Let's talk about the needs that they have and support them in the way that they want to be supported. They don't mean to have behaviors. They don't mean to hit and scratch and swear. It's a need that's unmet.
Okay. Yeah. So, for clinicians who feel constrained by systems or existing tools, existing language, what are some practical mindset shifts that they can begin applying immediately within their current framework?
It's really talking about, instead of the how do I stop this behavior? Ask yourself, okay, what is this need expressing? Is it expressing, I have a sensory need, my body needs some input? Is it expressing, this is too hard, I can't meet your expectation? Is it expressing, I need more support with this skill, I can't find it in my brain how to do it again today? Is it expressing, I didn't sleep good last night, my stomach hurts, I'm dysregulated because my mom yelled at me and rushed to me this morning, so I can't even think about anything. So really just stepping back and looking at, okay, what is this need expressing? And then really helping these kids understand themselves, noting the behavior or whatever it is that you're seeing, and then getting curious. Oh, I see you just threw your shoe across. Are you frustrated? Is this too hard? And then really leading with that empathy of, I see you have this need in this moment. And I know that's a big thing too. A big bias is we're taught if we give attention to that behavior, we're giving into it. And that's not the case. These kids are just wanting someone to see that, hey, I'm trying to express something. And again, we can set those boundaries. If you want to express this, you can do it this way, not throwing your shoe. And then if you have goals that you have to use right now, because we know IEPs are fixed, you do them every year, and you might be thinking, oh, I would love to change this goal. You don't have to change the goal, but instead of drilling a skill in isolation, embed it in their interests. Increase predictability in your sessions with how they come in, and you do this every time, and you create a schedule, and maybe each person gets to choose. So again, we're learning about relationships, and it's not always just about what I want. Just think about it. As speech therapists, if kids are coming in, especially working with autistic kids or neurodivergent kids, if kids are coming into our session and we lead the whole session, are we teaching them give and take in a relationship? No, we're teaching them I'm the grown up. I'm the person who's going to say how this goes. You don't have any say, and you're going to get pushback. But if we teach that back and forth, you choose and I choose, we're teaching that relationship, and it really reduces that overwhelm with kids when things are unpredictable, and offering those choices as well. It really provides that autonomy. So looking at the goals you have to work on, but just looking at, okay, what is this individual interested? And I realize every kid is interested in different things. And people are probably thinking, oh my gosh, I can't make materials for every kid. But you'll see patterns, right? Like kids love Paw Patrol, kids love Miss Rachel. You're going to see patterns of things that kids love. And Teachers Pay Teachers is amazing for those materials. So you don't have to recreate the wheel, but you're going to get a lot of buy in and motivation when your kids see that you're seeing them for who they are and their interests. And then the important thing too is share about yourself. We don't do that enough, which doesn't build that relationship either. One thing that for my kids that hate talking about emotion, that it's a trigger, I don't talk about their emotions. I come in sharing my emotion. Oh, do you hear my stomach grumble? I'm so hungry right now.
Mhm.
And I talk about myself. And again, that reduces that anxiety. So these tiny little things that you can do that build that relationship of taking turns, viewing, okay, this behavior is expressing a need. Let's problem solve. Let's figure out what you're trying to tell me. And then sharing about yourself, you're building so many foundational skills like self awareness, self advocacy, even that, again, it's humanizing the kids we're working with. You're working on so much more. And I realize our goal is speech and language. But if you have kids that are refusing, you're not getting any speech and language done anyways. So why not incorporate these skills into your session, because you're teaching all of these soft skills in the moment. And then what's going to happen is they're going to be excited to work with you. And then you can get to those skills you really want to address.
Mhm. Such a good point. Like what you said, if kids are refusing to work, you're not getting any speech and language. Is that basically what you were saying?
Exactly. Think about it. We've
Yeah.
all had sessions where even maybe the kid loves us, but they come in and they're shut down for whatever
Mhm.
reason. If we just talk about that, I know there was an example on a Facebook group about a kiddo who had a death in the family. And so they came in very sad and depressed. And I know many speech therapists are thinking, that's not our role. Well, I'm sorry. If a kid comes in and is shut down because they had a death in the family, you're not going to get your speech and language goals done anyways. And even if you bribe them with candy or stickers or stars, they're performing, they're not learning, they are going to do the skill the next time. But if you lead with empathy and acknowledge, oh, I see you look really sad. Do you want to talk about it for a minute? That little piece, again, you're teaching relationships, right? Which, especially when we're working with autistic kids, that's what we're working on in the big picture too, is relationships. And if we just ask about them, and that's not going to take your whole speech session, you talk about it for a couple minutes. And what that does to their nervous system is it calms them, it helps them feel seen. And then you can also offer, since you're having such a hard day, will you just let me know when you need some extra help? Because I'm here to help you if something's too hard. What is wrong with offering our kids help? Because again, maybe they don't have the capacity to find that information in their brain that day, that little extra help. And then they're truly learning the skill, they're connecting with you, and they are going to continue to work with you and be excited because they feel seen and heard.
Yeah, such great points. Thank you for sharing those. All right, so you included some free resources here. Do you want to talk about them a little bit?
I would love to. So we actually just closed our neurostrength-based assessment course just this past week in the beginning of March, but we do offer a free quick assessment. So you can get a little glimpse into some of the questions we ask. And actually, we also provide some ideas on what do you do with this information you just gathered. So it gives you an idea of how to shift your mindset in what you're asking about the client. But even more importantly, you start to shift on, oh, yeah, this is their trigger. How can I accommodate them in this moment? Or this is what they're trying to learn. How can I incorporate that into more sessions so I can support their intrinsic motivation? So it just gives you a little bit of a taste of the framework, the guide that our bigger assessment provides. And then Sue and I put out every week a little tidbit because we realize this is a giant shift and too much is going to become overwhelming. And what I've learned about my brain is if it's overwhelming, I shut down. So we just give you little tips every week. It's like a 15-minute video. You can listen to it in the car while you're running, while you're going on a walk, while you're cleaning. And then we also have a newsletter that we put out, which usually includes this tip along with other freebies that we have. And you can get on our newsletter through our website.
That's so awesome and super helpful for people. You said that the assessment course is closed. How often do you open it?
Yeah, so it'll be open again this summer. Probably, we're thinking maybe beginning August, end of August. We want to make sure and help, especially school therapists, so that they're ready for the next school year. And oftentimes they know that's when they have time for their CEUs. We do, because we do offer a professional development certificate at the end for 3 hours. And so it will be again this summer.
That's awesome. Okay, so you shared some research articles here, and I know probably on your website or within your course, you have a long list of other articles that you use to develop your framework. But we wanted to highlight these four here. Two of them are open access, so they're free to view, which is amazing. These two are not, but still, like she's sharing them, so they are worth paying for to review. I want to highlight that they are considered lower quality because they're more like literature reviews, but they're not a systematic review or a meta-analysis. They're not looking at randomized control studies, or they're more like an opinion piece. But because they're open access, we definitely think there's some value to them. And then in general, it just shows that we need more studies, like, randomized control studies in this area for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And we would love if somebody listening is going for their PhD and is super interested in assessments compared to traditional, please reach out because we've already researched our framework and got great results. And so we want to show that with this new framework of assessment, it is just as successful and provides you with even deeper, more quality information than some of our standardized tests. So, anyone listening that is interested in doing a research study, we'd love to connect.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking you should be doing some reliability and validity on it. You do have some gold standard assessments that you could compare it to, and you could even do like a feature analysis to see are there certain questions that are more valuable to therapists and clients, and maybe some of them need to be revised. I don't know if you did like a focus group on any of the specific questions, but I've been reading a lot more articles recently about assessments, and it's interesting when you break down the test how irrelevant some of the questions are and like they have to swap them out.
Absolutely. So we actually have evolved since 2019. This assessment has had probably 15 different iterations of it. And so it has evolved because we found certain questions didn't make sense to parents. We did also have an autistic psychologist, autistic SLP, and an autistic school advocate review this not only for the language, but also to make sure that it was inclusive. And so we had other people review this too. But absolutely, we realize that things evolve, right? This whole framework is all about we learn to do better, we do better. So I love that idea.
Well, and I always love partnering with you guys for making sense with autism because I feel like you practice what you talk about, practice what you preach, I guess. And you really do listen to autistic voices and it shows. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Where can everybody find and connect with you?
We have our website, www.makingsenseofautism.com. And then we have an Instagram. Our handle is at making.sense.of.autism, as well as Facebook and a LinkedIn profile. And then you can always email me at Stacy with an I at makingsenseofautism.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stacey.
Thank you.